Hi, welcome back to The Sensory Life.
I didn't see it coming when I wasn't looking. That's when it crashed down, threw me to the ground. I got the wind knocked out.
What is a sensory processing disorder? Well, according to my new book that I'm reading called Raising a Sensory Smart Child, the Definitive Handbook for Helping Your Child with Sensory Processing Issues by Lindsay Beal and Nancy Pesk, sensory processing refers to how people use the information provided by all the sensations coming from within the body and from the external environment.
What does that mean?
Basically, if you have a sensory processing disorder, everything that you feel, touch, hear, smell, taste is either overreactive or underreactive in those areas. And to make it even more confusing, those reactions can change daily. So just when you think you have figured out, okay, this is how I'm going to help my child, the next day, that issue from the day before is no longer an issue, and now you're on to something else. And then maybe a week later, you're back to the initial issue. And I feel like we have to be very fluid in the way that we approach a sensory processing disorder child. It's important to know a sensory processing disorder is not an actual diagnosis. There is a manual that is used for psychiatry that has all of the qualifiable disorders. And a sensory processing disorder is not in that book. It's called the DSM-5 manual. It's the Assessment and Diagnosis of Mental Disorders. The definition of a sensory processing disorder is different for everybody. Confused yet? I'm still confused, and I've been researching and looking into this and working with therapists, and I still don't have a clear definition. All I know is what it looks like in my daughter's everyday life. Out of all the doctors and therapists that we have seen, the one that labeled Cece with this disorder was her occupational therapist. Another important question to ask is, can it be prevented? And the answer is no, because doctors don't know what causes it to begin with. With occupational therapy, Cece is able to experience stimuli in a safe environment where she doesn't feel overwhelmed. That's important. It's best to start therapies as early as possible so that as children are introduced different stimuli, they can learn coping strategies on how to deal with that stimuli, and eventually those strategies will become a part of their everyday life. Sensory issues can resolve on their own or become more mild and less interfering in everyday life. Let me say that again. It is possible for her to outgrow this disorder, which is why you want to start therapies early. With Cece having SPD, it can be exhausting for her. It is exhausting for us as her parents. She lives in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. With the idea that sensory processing disorder children are in a constant state of flight, fight, or freeze, I want to give one example of what that actually looks like. I mentioned in my previous video that we were having Cece screened through the public school system in our area to see if she can qualify for special needs preschool. The first evaluation is just hearing and vision. That's all they do. It's only about 30 minutes. It's not a huge deal. But I spoke to her occupational therapist and I said, how do I prepare Cece for a vision and a hearing test? Remember, nobody can touch her. She does not like strangers to touch her. She doesn't like strange environments. I said it before and I'll say it again. She doesn't like rooms with fluorescent lighting, which is where all of these screenings take place, is in that type of environment. I asked her occupational therapist, what can I do to prepare her? And she said, maybe you don't prepare her. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And she said, let them see what you see. And that was really powerful to me because, as I've said before, there's so much preparation that goes into leaving the house and going anywhere new whenever I'm working with Cece. So this idea that I don't prep her, that we just show up and we see what happens, was very nerve-wracking for me. But I did want them to see what I see on a daily basis. We showed up to our appointment. They took us in the back to do a vision test. The vision test wasn't difficult because they didn't need to come near her and they didn't need anything to touch her. So we were able to get through that. I could tell that she was on edge, but she was still in a reasonable state of calm. So then they moved us down the hall to another room, had us sit in a chair, and we waited for her hearing test. One of the workers came out and they had a small little box that had what looked almost like an audio speaker. They said, this is what we're going to put in her ear and then we can test her hearing this way. In that moment, Cece flipped into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And I would say what happened was she went directly into freeze mode. She started screaming. She no longer seemed to be there with me. She was sitting on my lap. I was hugging her and she was screaming and saying, no, no, no. There were other workers that heard my child, who was at this point freaking out, and they would come over and everyone with their soft voices were trying to make things fun and, hey, like, let's try this and let's try this. And what they don't understand is when she's in that mode, nothing you say, nothing you give her is going to help. She needs a break from the situation. So at one point I said, can you all please give us a minute? I said, everything around us right now is setting her off. Everything is overwhelming her. I was singing to her in her ear and giving her hugs because she was still sitting on me. None of that mattered. So as soon as everybody walked away, we were able to get back to a place of reason again. The worker who initially came over and said, this is the device we're going to use to test her hearing, all we need to do is put it in her ear. At one point, she handed the earpiece to Cece, so Cece can just hold it and know that it's not going to hurt her and it's okay. Reasonable enough if your child does not have SPD. So Cece, in her freeze mode, when she was screaming and trying to get everyone away from her and not responding to me at all, gripped this earpiece so tightly that when the worker realized that Cece wasn't going to let this thing go near her ear, she was like trying to just take back the device from us, and we could not get it out of her hand. She was so scared and so elevated and just screaming so loud and was so terrified that she made a fist around this, and I had to physically pry open her fingers just to try to get it out of her hand so the worker could take the device and get away from us. In all of this, it was so chaotic and so heartbreaking that I started tearing up and crying with Cece. There is nothing to be done other than removing her from the situation, getting everybody away from her. And they were all trying to do their best. They all came over with their best tricks and their, happy smiles and their fun voices. It didn't matter. So after about 5 minutes, we were able to use some of our coping strategies that we have already developed and get her calmed down. And then they ended up testing her hearing in a room that didn't involve anybody coming near her, anything going in her ears, and that's how we were able to get the hearing test completed. That is what fight, flight, or freeze looks like. And in Cece's case, she went into that flight and freeze mode. One of the most important things to remember is that she can't control her reactions to stimuli, which is why it requires a great amount of patience, understanding, and really a strong desire to put yourself in her shoes and know what she's feeling. That is what has helped us in intense situations, because on my best days, I have a calmness about me. I am understanding. I can talk slow and at her level. On my worst days, for example, bedtime, there's a whole routine that goes into getting Cece to slow down at the end of the day so that she can go to bed and it not be a power struggle, and it not be her crying and having a tantrum. So what we do is we simulate a calming environment for her. She has special lights that she calls her Wall-E lights from the movie Wall-E. There's a scene where he's in space and he puts his hand through like the stars. So we have a projector in her bedroom that looks like those stars from Wall-E. So we play her Wall-E lights. She always has music playing, either something very soothing like Liquid Mind. If you haven't heard of Liquid Mind, you're missing out, because you don't need to have sensory issues to be able to respond and mellow out as soon as you hear it. We were introduced to it from my massage therapist, because that's what she would play when she would be giving me a massage, and it's so relaxing. The other things we use at bedtime, she always has water, a water bottle next to her bed because she gets thirsty in the middle of the night. And depending on her mood, she will choose which blanket she wants. Whichever ones she doesn't want, they can't be touching her, they can't be near her. She also likes to pick a book and a doll. So when you put all these things together, it's a process. First she has her shower, she gets her hair blow dried every single night because she has very long, thick hair. And then we do pajamas, we watch a quick 10-15 minute show to kind of relax her. And then we're off into the bedroom at that point. The lights come on, the music comes on. We pick the blanket, we make sure she has water. And then we either sing a song, we say prayers, and then it's time for bed. Well, when you've done that 6, 7, 8 times in one night, and all you want to do is sleep, which is the category that I always fall into, I just sometimes at my worst days lose my patience with her. And so after I've done all those things and said my goodnights and gave hugs and kisses, I'll go to leave and she'll say, "Mom, can I have a hug?" And at that point, I'm done. I've done everything that she's asked of me over and over and over and over and over. I just want to get ready for bed. There have been times where I have said, "No, you don't get a hug."
No, you don't get a hug.
And then I've stopped myself, realized what it is that I just said to her, and then gone over and said, "Yes, you can have one last hug." And then I give her her hug and then walk out. Be patient with yourself, because you're not always going to be at the top of your game. You're not always going to be fully rested and fed and hydrated. That sometimes doesn't bring out the best in me. So maybe that day you have a shorter temper, you're not as patient, you're not as gentle and kind and understanding. That's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. Take a deep breath and try again. And give your child the freedom to do the same. Another area that we have been working on is getting in and out of the car. This was a pain point for us in our life because Cece did not like to be strapped into her car seat, and she's 3 years old, so she does have a 5-point harness that she has to get into in her car seat. And it was such a struggle for so long. And one day, my husband was trying to get her into the van, and she was pushing and doing all, moving around and not letting him buckle her up, and she was crying. And he said, "Okay, he said, push my finger." And he put his hand out like this, and she was able to push, let's just say this finger. She pushed this, and then he made the sound like this, and he went boop, 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 boop. And he pushed the button on the sliding door that automatically closes the door. And she smiled and she calmed down. And I was on the other side of the van, and I'm like, "Oh, that's brilliant." Another aspect to sensitivity is offering a degree of control And that's what my husband did that day. He didn't know that he was doing that. He just was desperate to try anything that he could, and it worked. Getting in and out of the van now is no longer an issue. We've been doing this for months, and every time she gets in her car seat, she says boop. And so we know what that means. We put our hand out, she picks a finger, presses it, and then we go boop, 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 and push that button, and the door starts to close, and we're all happy.
Daddy, what?
Cool.
Go to the beach, Daddy.
Cece, hi.
Wants to go to the beach, Mom?
I know soon.
Not beach yet.
It's almost time
Spray
though.
lessons. Guys, go to spray lessons. Swim.
No, not swim lessons today.
I told her tomorrow we're gonna play in the water,
Ah.
so we need swim shoes. Here we go.
Boop, 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 boop.
Swim.
Now, when you develop these strategies to help your child, you need to remember them. There have been times where I have been in a hurry and I get her in, she's happy, I push the button myself and I go to get inside the car really fast and I'm sitting in the seat and she starts crying. And she's like, Mom, you didn't boop. So I'm like, you know what, it's fine, we don't need to, we gotta go, we're in a hurry. And then the meltdown happens and she starts crying. So that's where that patience comes in, because I do have to stop the car, I do have to get out, unlock the doors, open the sliding door, put my hand out, let her press a finger, and do the very simple act of boop, 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 close the door. There is some kind of magic when you give a child some form of control, and that has worked for us. Another thing we do in the car is we give her a coloring pad that she can hold in her hands. She can color if she wants. That seems to really help her too, when she has something in her hands and she's not just sitting in her car seat. Another tip that has worked for us in the car is letting her choose music. And again, there's that degree of control that we are handing to her. And we ask, what do you want to listen to today? And she gets to pick a song. There are times where I'm done listening to the same nursery songs and the same songs that we sing every day all the time. So sometimes I do put my foot down and say, okay, you already picked your song, now it's Mom's turn to have a mom song, and that's okay. Sensory processing disorders look different for everybody. What it looks like for my daughter Cece could be the total opposite what it looks like for your child. And remember, the needs of today may not be the needs of tomorrow, and the answers of today may not be the answers for another 2 weeks. So keep adding different coping mechanisms to your bag of tricks. I'm so excited for the next video, because that's where we're going to lay out all of the strategies that we have learned. You don't want to miss it.
Cause I'm sinking, drowning, ground, can't find my feet. I'm trying hard to breathe, but I'm in too deep. Trying to fight the tide, but I don't want to try. My lungs are burning, can't get a deep breath. Every time I come for air, it hits me again. I'm supposed to live if it never ends.
Okay.